On May 28, 2026, NASA lost its backup. A fireball consumed Space Launch Complex 36 at Cape Canaveral that evening. The rocket was Blue Origin's New Glenn, 321 feet tall, named after the first American to orbit the Earth, and the only vehicle capable of carrying the hardware that was supposed to put humans back on the moon. The explosion was caught on video. The launch pad was gutted. No one was hurt. And the first explanation was simple. Rockets fail. This happens. The story should have ended there, but 3 days before the blast, NASA had handed Blue Origin a $188 million contract for that rocket, for that pad. That is where this gets harder to close. A static fire test is not a launch. It is the opposite. The rocket stays bolted to the ground, engines ignite, engineers confirm everything works, and then the vehicle is cleared to fly. It is supposed to be the safe part, the check before the check. When New Glenn's fourth booster, designated NG-4, lit its 7 engines on the evening of May 28, something went catastrophically wrong. The vehicle did not lift off. It disintegrated on the pad, engulfing the entire launch complex in a fireball visible for miles. The pad itself, not just the rocket, was heavily damaged. That detail matters more than it sounds. Blue Origin has one operational launch pad for New Glenn, not two, one. When it burned, the company lost not just the rocket, but the infrastructure to ever fly another one from that location until reconstruction is complete. For comparison, when SpaceX lost a rocket on the pad in 2016, the Amos 6 explosion at Cape Canaveral, the company was able to continue flying from a second launch site at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California while repairs were made at the Florida facility. It was back flying from that pad within 15 months. That recovery story is the one NASA and the industry reached for first on the night of May 28, 2026. The comparison sounds reassuring until you check the details. Blue Origin does not have a Vandenberg. It does not have a backup pad. It suspended its only other rocket, New Shepard, the smaller suborbital vehicle that had been carrying passengers to the edge of space, in early 2025 deliberately to concentrate every resource on New Glenn and the Moon program. That decision made sense at the time. New Glenn was the future. New Shepard was a tourist vehicle. The Moon was the mission. But it means that as of May 29, 2026, Blue Origin has no operational rocket on Earth. Not one. The company is, for now, grounded in total. And yet 3 days earlier, NASA had given it $188 million. Here is what that contract was for. Blue Moon Mark I is the uncrewed cargo version of Blue Origin's lunar lander. It was scheduled to launch from Cape Canaveral this fall in 2026, carrying NASA science payloads to a specific location on the Moon's surface, the Shackleton Connecting Ridge, near the lunar South Pole. That target is not chosen randomly. The South Pole of the Moon sits in near-permanent shadow in places, which means the temperature never rises enough to evaporate what has accumulated there over billions of years. Water ice, buried in crater floors that have not seen sunlight since before the dinosaurs. That ice is the most strategically significant substance on the Moon right now, because water ice can be converted into hydrogen and oxygen, rocket propellant, which means anyone who controls it controls the refueling infrastructure for every mission that follows. The $188 million contract was not a footnote. It was a piece of the architecture for everything that comes after. That mission is now impossible on any near-term timeline. But here is where the story shifts, because the natural answer to Blue Origin's grounding is straightforward. SpaceX, the other half of NASA's strategy, the company that has been building a lunar lander of its own. A version of Starship called the Human Landing System, or Starship HLS, holds a separate contract to carry astronauts to the lunar surface. If Blue Origin cannot fly, SpaceX absorbs the burden. That is what redundancy means. That is why NASA built the program with two companies instead of one. The logic holds. The story, again, sounds like it closes. Except there is one thing Starship HLS has never done. It has never touched the moon. Not in an uncrewed test. Not in any form. The vehicle that was meant to serve as the fallback for NASA's entire return to the moon program has not yet demonstrated the most fundamental capability required, landing on another world. And that is not the technical problem. The technical problem is what has to happen before the lander even leaves Earth orbit. In March 2026, NASA's own Office of Inspector General released a report. It was not a minor document. It examined both the SpaceX and Blue Origin lander programs and found that both were behind schedule. Both. The OIG identified a specific risk for Starship HLS, in-orbit cryogenic propellant transfer. To understand why that matters, consider what Starship HLS actually requires to function. One crewed Starship cannot carry enough fuel from Earth to reach the moon. Not even close. So SpaceX's plan involves launching more than 11 separate Starship tanker vehicles into orbit, transferring liquid methane and liquid oxygen between them in the vacuum of space, a process requiring extreme precision with volatile, super-cold propellants, building up enough fuel in a depot vehicle, and then transferring that fuel to the actual lander before it departs for the moon. 11 launches, cryogenic transfers, in orbit, before a single astronaut goes anywhere. As of March 2026, SpaceX had not demonstrated this process at any scale. The OIG said so directly. It was the top technical risk in the entire Human Landing System program. That report came out 10 weeks before the Blue Origin explosion. And then, with that report on the record, with both landers officially behind, with the OIG warning that even the revised 2028 crewed landing target was not guaranteed, NASA signed a new contract with Blue Origin, the $188 million, for the rocket that was about to burn. The agency was not hiding that information. The OIG report was public. NASA's own statements acknowledged delays. The administrator had spoken about schedule pressure and competition with China. None of this was secret. But the timing is the kind of detail that does not let a story close easily. The watchdog had warned the plan was under strain. The agency had responded by deepening its commitment to both programs. 3 days later, one of them was gone. There is no confirmed evidence that NASA had any specific warning that NG-4 was about to explode. The OIG was flagging program-level delays, not a specific vehicle's safety. The investigation into what actually failed during that static fire test had barely begun by the time this was written. What is known is simpler and, in its own way, more unsettling. The agency built a program around two fragile pillars, both behind schedule, both unproven in their most critical capabilities, and one of them collapsed in an evening. The question is not whether NASA made the wrong call in signing the contract. The question is, what happens now? Because SpaceX's fallback has problems of its own that the Blue Origin fireball did not create. It only exposed. The number is 11. Before a single astronaut can board a Starship and begin the journey to the moon's surface, SpaceX must first launch 11 or more separate Starship vehicles into Earth orbit. Each one carries cryogenic propellant, liquid methane and liquid oxygen, kept at temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero. Those vehicles transfer their fuel, in sequence, to a depot sitting in orbit. The depot fills. Then the depot transfers that accumulated fuel to the actual lander. Only then does the lander depart for the moon. 11 launches, multiple cryogenic transfers between vehicles moving at 17,000 miles per hour, in vacuum, in the dark. As of June 2026, SpaceX has never done this once. Not a partial test, not a simplified demonstration. The orbital propellant transfer that underpins the entire Starship human landing system architecture, the technical foundation on which NASA's return to the moon now almost entirely depends, remains undemonstrated. NASA's Inspector General said so in March. The Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel had been flagging it since 2023. The OIG's March 2026 report stated plainly that SpaceX's ability to meet even the revised 2028 target for a crewed lunar landing was far from guaranteed. That was 2 months before Blue Origin's launchpad turned into wreckage. So here is where the story actually stands. NASA has 2 contractors for human lunar landers. One just lost its only rocket and its only launch pad. The other has never performed the central technical maneuver required to reach the moon with a crew. The program was designed around the idea that having 2 options meant having a backup. What the explosion revealed is that neither option was close enough to operational to function as a safety net for the other. That is not a cover-up. There is no evidence NASA concealed anything. The OIG reports were public. The delays were acknowledged. The technical risks were documented. What is true is simply this. The architecture assumed that 2 programs in parallel, both partially behind, both still developing, somehow added up to one reliable system. The math only works if both remain viable. The moment one disappears, the equation does not hold. The administration knew the race had stakes. NASA Acting Administrator Sean Duffy had said it directly on television in the weeks before the explosion that the United States was in a race against China, that the president wanted Americans on the moon before the end of his term, that he was willing to open the Artemis III lander contract to any company that could get there first. That statement was made because Starship was already slipping. Blue Origin was being accelerated as a hedge against SpaceX's delays. Then Blue Origin's pad burned. There is now talk of a Lockheed Martin-led concept. A cross-industry team working on an alternative lander. But no timeline exists. No contract has been awarded. No vehicle has been tested. It is, at this moment, an idea competing against a deadline. The deadline is China. Here is why the South Pole matters enough to frame everything around it. The permanently shadowed craters near the lunar South Pole contain water ice that accumulated over billions of years, undisturbed because sunlight never reaches the crater floors. Some of these deposits have not seen a photon since before complex life existed on Earth. That ice is not a scientific curiosity. It is infrastructure. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, the same propellants that power rockets. A country that establishes a presence at the South Pole, that begins extracting and converting that ice, controls the resupply chain for every deep space mission that follows. The moon becomes a waypoint rather than a destination. China has publicly stated its goal of reaching the lunar South Pole with taikonauts by around 2030. The United States wants to be there first. That is what the Artemis program is for. That is what the Blue Moon Mark I mission this fall was meant to begin. That mission is gone. And the confirmed crewed landing, through the most advanced remaining option, requires a chain of orbital operations that has never been tested at any scale, in a vehicle whose crew compartment sits 35 meters above the lunar surface. That last detail deserves a moment. 35 meters is roughly the height of a 10-story building. When Starship HLS lands on the moon, the crew does not step off a ladder onto the surface. They ride an elevator, a mechanical system attached to the outside of a vehicle that has just survived a powered landing on another world, with no pad, no guidance tower, no rescue infrastructure of any kind within 250,000 miles. NASA's own safety advisors identified this as a top risk. There is currently no backup system for that elevator. If it fails, the crew is stranded above the surface with no way down. This is not speculation. These are the documented concerns of NASA's own Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel on the record before May 2026. Consider what it means to be one of the 4 astronauts assigned to Artemis 3 right now. NASA has named a crew, real people with assignments, training schedules, mission profiles. Their job is to travel to lunar orbit and dock with a commercial lander that will carry them to the surface. That lander, as of this writing, has not completed an uncrewed test landing on the Moon. The vehicle that was meant to complement it, Blue Moon, cannot fly. The launch pad that would have launched the uncrewed Pathfinder mission is damaged beyond near-term use. The lander version of Starship has never demonstrated the propellant transfer chain it requires to function. And the crewed lunar landing target date has already moved from 2024 to 2026 to 2027 to a revised 2028 that the OIG itself described as uncertain. If you were sitting in that crew's position, having trained for years, having run every simulation, having committed to a mission that the entire nation has been told will define the next era of space exploration, what you would be waiting for right now is an announcement about what happens next. A plan, a timeline, a confirmed path forward. As of June 1st, 2026, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman has said publicly that the agency will provide further information on the impact to Artemis. That is the full extent of what has been stated. No restructured plan, no alternate vehicle confirmed, no timeline revised in public. The investigation into the NG-4 explosion is days old. The scramble is real, and it is not yet finished. This is the part most people skip when they see footage of a rocket burning on a launch pad. They see a spectacular industrial failure and assume the system absorbs it. They assume the backup is ready. They assume the other company catches what was dropped. That assumption is what the Artemis architecture was supposed to guarantee. 2 landers, 2 contractors, competition accelerating both. Redundancy as the safety net. What the OIG had been saying, quietly, in documented reports, for years, is that the redundancy was thinner than it looked, that both programs were behind, that the technical risks had not been retired, that the schedule buffer was shrinking, that the most critical milestones remained undone. The blueprint for a resilient program existed on paper. In practice, by May 2026, both landers were unproven and one was in pieces. Go back to the image from that evening. The fireball at Complex 36. The pad infrastructure collapsing in smoke and heat. It looked like a singular, sudden catastrophe. One bad moment in a test that was supposed to be routine. And in one sense, it was. Rockets fail. Pads are destroyed. Programs absorb shocks and rebuild. That part of the story is probably true. But the fire did not create the problem. It revealed it. It burned away the appearance of margin and left the actual margin visible. Narrow, disputed, time-pressured, and now down to one unproven vehicle whose most critical capability has never been tested, pointed at a place where another nation is racing to arrive first. The lunar South Pole is unchanged by any of this. The shadowed craters are still there. The ice is still buried in the dark, undisturbed, as it has been for longer than Earth has had oceans. It does not know about the contract signing, or the explosion, or the OIG report, or the 4 astronauts waiting for a plan. It will wait as long as it needs to. The question, as of today, is whether the program built to reach it still has a way there, and when that answer will be confirmed in public, not just promised.